On Neoplanet S, and down to the bottom left-hand corner of the map, we have our red Terran player. He is up 1-0 in this best of 3, just one game away from getting back to Premier. He is Ryung. And his opponent in the top right-hand corner, our blue Terran player trying to tie this set up and make it a third game here in this best of 3. He is TheStC.
Alrighty, Kevin.
Alrighty, Andrew.
It's time. This could be the last map.
Yeah.
For Season 2.
Yeah, no kidding.
all.
This, you know, I mean, obviously, we're all pulling for, not bias towards one player or another, but I always pull towards the guy who's behind in the set to force a game 3. You always like to see more StarCraft.
Underdogs, man.
Yeah. And
why do they call it underdog? Why not under cat? Why not under...
I actually don't have a clue. Someone knows that answer, please tweet at us.
Yeah.
I would appreciate it.
Curious about the origins.
This time, we have similar build orders for both players, and Ryung decided to go for a gas after his barracks rather than for that super early gas first.
Okay. So, Neoplanet S, we are talking about how this is a game where it often comes to the player who makes the least mistakes.
Yeah.
And you can say that about TVT in general sometimes, but often it's one mistake that suddenly you're out of position and you don't know what to do, right?
Absolutely.
Neoplanet S, there's a lot of room to like fall back on this map because the distances between bases is actually pretty far. So you can make a mistake out in the middle of the map once and it's not the end of the world. If your opponent gets you sieged into your third base, let's say, hey, you just swing around the bottom. Also, not the biggest deal in the world. There's a lot of attack paths on this map, a lot of opportunities to counter. So I think overall, Neoplanet S is actually a great representation for TVT as to who's the better player. Unlike some maps where, you know, it may come down to who makes the first mistake and therefore gets in a position where it's easier for them to play from.
I totally agree, especially in the volatile TVT where one bad engagement against a Marine tank and your whole army's obliterated and your 40 supply advantage that you thought you had is completely wiped out.
You don't have it anymore.
Exactly. And we've seen that play out time and time again in TVTs. And I agree with your sentiment in large part on this map, that you're not as susceptible to some sort of a huge counterattack because you can retreat quicker. But what you do have to be conscious of is how much space you have to defend. You have to have immaculate positioning on all of your tanks, because if you leave just even a little bit of space open off to that right-hand side, as we're looking at right here, then your opponent is going to be able to, well, they can choose 1 or 2 attack paths to make their way into the third. They can drop around the sides, or they can barrel their way right down into the natural.
Or they can pull like Bomber and Tasia and pick up your entire army, fly from what you were attacking the third, fly into the main, and then siege up in an area where your opponent can't actually enter their own base. It's actually really, it's an important strategy on this map because of the fact that you you have this area that juts out and is asking to be dropped on. If you get the high ground, it can be really difficult for your opponent.
Multiple Reapers for both players, but one additional one for Ryung, and he's not made any move to get out there and get anything done with those for now, just purely keeping them in a defensive position. So, inevitably, his reactor will be just a little bit more delayed, his factory was a little bit more delayed, and TheStC is just going to be slightly ahead on his timings.
Not too much of a deal overall.
No.
So, it looks like both players are going into, you know, Cloaked Banshee. Be interesting to see if either of them opts to go for like a Raven into a Viking. That's really the only way you want to combat it, but the problem is that if you get the Raven, so like Ryung in this situation, very unlikely that he would do that because he doesn't have the Marines. The problem that you run into if you don't go Cloaked Banshee in TVT right now is extremely often you end up having to use a bunch of scans. And those scans, well, they of course are equivalent to money, and suddenly you had to use these scans to detect your opponent's Banshees. They keep their Banshees alive or they're killed off. Either way, you end up in a position where you're economically behind.
Yes.
It looks like that Ryung is going to opt for a Viking first. So he won't actually be going the Banshee route.
Right, and this is a couple of things for him. He obviously doesn't have to make that huge investment. Oh, here we have 4 Hellions versus 3 Hellions, 2 Reapers versus 3 Reapers. And it looks like Ryung, with the additional Reaper but less Hellions, is going to be forced back. But he sits on the high ground, and that's going to give him a couple of great shots there. Pretty nice control, I have to say, out of Ryung, and he's going to drive this back.
Yep, he's going to pick off all of these units as the Reapers do. Oh, nice split, though, from the TheStC. Great decision because he manages to keep a Hellion alive that way.
First Banshee's making its way out, though, but the Raven, I'm sorry, is already on the way for Ryung. So he's going to have mobile detection. He's going to have anti-air prepared. I'm not sure if TheStC is going to be too happy with what he sees.
Yeah, he's going to be coming in with Cloaked Banshees in a moment here. Banshee is already making its way across the middle of the battlefield, and Cloak is about to complete. Ryung, as you said, Kevin, I mean, the Viking's done. The Raven's going to be done in just a second. We'll see. So far, he's killed 2 workers, and that's it.
That's right. But 2 to 1 workers killed. Now slightly increasing. He's able to pick on those slightly weaker, slightly injured units there for a little while. Cloak is going to be used here in a second. There it goes. But that Raven is finishing right now.
Yep, Raven's about to pop out. No additional workers should go down here. Okay.
Oh, and at the same time, Ryung is actually counterattacking and doing some pretty good damage. He's going to clean up most of these Hellions that were sitting over off to the side, but now is forced to retreat.
Great control from the STC, pulling back with this Banshee while defending against that attack. It can be very easy to hear your units are under attack. Go look over your natural expansion before you know it, your Banshee's dead, not the STC. This guy has great control and map awareness overall.
All right. Well, a much earlier third base coming out of Ryung than the STC. The STC, of course, put a lot more resources into his aggression. He produced 2 Banshees. He researched Cloak. He was much delayed on his Raven. So it was a little less of an opportunity for him to get his expansion off the ground. And it is about 40 seconds delayed. He, of course, tries to counter that by doing a little bit more damage to his opponent. But let's go ahead and take a look at the workers lost, if you don't mind me.
Yeah, 7-2.
7-2. So because of the 1 worker that was killed before, this is really only 6 workers that have died to now 3 Banshees.
Yeah, overall, it's fairly even when you consider the Banshee, but that's basically a Banshee trade for 5 workers, which is not too bad, you know. He didn't use a scan, though, which is really, really nice for Ryung. This second Banshee will be a question. Is it going to give Ryung a further advantage if he can pick it off? Manages to take off, actually, it's killed 4 units so far, so not bad at all.
Yeah, and I apologize. There were only actually 2 Banshees created in this game. That one survived from before, went back, got repaired, and came back in. So, yeah, 2 kills from before, 2 kills now. So it's starting to pay for itself just a little bit. But, you know, Ryung, he's got his third base just finishing up. The orbital command is flipping onto it right now. And we'll see what they move into here in a second. But clearly, we're staring down Mech. Armory on the way.
Yeah, Kevin, this is going to be super interesting because we've got, right now, we were talking about the possibility of counterattacks on this map, and the STC, he's opting to go for Mech, which is a lot less mobile. You were talking about how difficult a third could be to take on this map.
Yeah.
And yet, here we are. Mech player, STC is going to take a little bit before it's actually safe for him to take that base.
Andrew, I have to jump in with very important news.
Yeah.
I know where Underdog comes from now. Because of our wonderful producers, Underdog is from bear baiting. And I hope they're just trolling me and this is totally wrong and this doesn't have... So I'm going to blame the producers if this is off. The top dog was trained to attack the bear's throat and head. Underdog was trained to attack the bear's underside. The top dog had a better chance of surviving and beating the bear, whereas the underdog was more likely to die. So if that's wrong, blame our producers, but I thank them for bringing in that information.
Huh.
There you go.
The underdog, all right. The origins of Underdog.
All right, there you have it.
From hunting, it seems, from hunting bears.
There you go. Bear is OP, as Tim points out there. Bear, the bear unit in any of these. I'm surprised Terrans haven't resurrected the bear to be put forth. I'm looking at you, David Kim. Let's get that in Legacy of the Void. All right, guys, so third base is down for both players now. That small aside out of the way. We had a bit of a lull in the action, but clearly we're steaming ahead towards Mech on Mech.
We are. And this is going to be really interesting as we see both players gearing up in quite intensely. We have a 4th, actually. Nope, that is not a 4th. That's a lie. It's barracks.
It is a barracks. Would have been a weird spot for that 4th, but would have been cool. I'd be like, oh, super hit.
I was like, awesome. Yeah, he's not building it on, like, normally you build your 4th up at the top. In this area that we were talking about earlier, it's vulnerable to counter, so we see planetaries.
All right, well, Banshee doing a nice job of just picking away at a couple of units here. STC's had good control, and he's been very annoying with that unit basically the entire game. But we do have relatively even footing for both these guys. +1 weapons is going to finish up pretty close to each other. STC is about 20 seconds ahead. He's a little bit slower on his infrastructure, a little bit quicker on his upgrades. It's kind of a wash at this point. A little bit better income for Ryung, though, due to his earlier third.
It looks like Ryung has finally spotted the Vikings of the STC because he's begun making some Vikings of his own. Ryung had the Viking advantage 3-0 earlier on, and then the STC started cranking them out 2 at a time, and suddenly the STC, he's actually at 8 Vikings to 7. Both players are about to make 2 more, so it's going to be 10-9. Small Viking advantage for the STC at this time, and that's really important in Mech versus Mech, because the player who has air superiority is the player who doesn't have to scan.
And how often have you seen, Vikings kill each other, and there's one lone Banshee that survives at the end, and it wipes out 3 tanks and completely unsieges a Mech player. That's very critical.
All right. 147, 152. Game looking pretty even between these guys. Looks like TheStC is actually the first player to drop down a 4th base. Got a constructing in his main. Or, yeah.
Yep,
main base.
About halfway done for now. Drilling Claws being researched, +2 weapons on the way for both players now. Infernal Pre-Igniter coming up for TheStC. And we're just kind of in that nice lull in Mech where you wait for things to finally get established and one player to start trying to get aggressive on the map.
Interesting that Ryung is opting for the Drilling Claws. You know, he wants to be able to go for Widow Mines, it seems. And this is really, really good in Mech vs. Mech when your opponent's going to go for lots of Sky. The TheStC does have 12 Vikings at this point, so we'll see how that pans out for him. Blue Flame Hellion is finally on the way here for the TheStC. It's approaching being about halfway done.
Yeah, but of course, that did give Ryung a little bit of an advantage as he was able to get out there and start forcing some units back. Nice job with these Vikings to pick away at the barracks that was floating overhead. That's annoying for a Mech player just because you have to rebuild one before you can put up more factories and such.
Yeah.
But not the biggest deal, but it does. I mean, it's essentially a huge 1,000 hit point scout is what it amounts to.
Oh, completely. One of the things I want to say from Ryung here that I really like, Kevin, is that he's making a Thor. And one Thor, maybe two, but one Thor in your army is so awesome when your opponent's making lots of Vikings because of the splash damage it does. You take one volley with that, all of a sudden your opponent, hold that thought, we've got Vikings dueling right now before the Thor even hits the battlefield. Point defense drones going down for both players. Overall, it looks like the TheStC is going to win that fight.
And did you see the sick move he made too? He actually sacrificed, or he was going to sacrifice his Raven. He threw it up to the front. He was like, I don't care. This is a mini point defense drone right now. I wanted to start absorbing a couple of Viking shots because that gives me the advantage in the air.
But the TheStC does take that fight, and that gives him the air superiority, which honestly is really difficult to come back from when your opponent has taken that air superiority. But hold that thought, Raven gets sniped as it flies over the missile turrets. Severe damage right now being dealt to this air. 2 Vikings go down.
Wow.
And
okay.
a Raven.
That's pretty big, actually, for Ryung because he had, as you said, lost that air advantage. We can take a look at the units tab now to see how many Vikings there are for both players. It looks like 4 for Ryung, 8 for the TheStC, so he still has the advantage there. But that would have been a critical misstep for Ryung had he not been able to kill those.
Interesting that we have such differences in the amount of tanks versus the amount of Hellbats.
Right.
18 to 13 tanks, but double the Hellbat count for Ryung. He has 24 Hellbats. The TheStC has a bunch of Hellions instead. He's opting for less.
You know when having double the Hellbats works, though, is when you have air superiority. You can get a couple of medevacs, you can drop right on top of those. But funny enough, Ryung has more Hellbats, but he does not have air superiority right now, so it's going to limit his mobility.
And he's not trying to get it. We'd see no Vikings on the way for either player at this time. But 2 command centers for TheStC. Looks like we have a fight towards the middle of the map. Tanks sieging up.
We have a drop coming in at the same time that was cleaned up pretty efficiently by Ryung, but here, massive explosions going off on both sides, and the Hellbats were actually able to drop right on top because the Vikings were a bit out of position for the TheStC, and it looks like every one of these tanks is going to die. So they're battling each other to a bit of a standstill right now, but the end result is that both players stand with 4 bases. Ryung is able to take that engagement, if only slightly.
Such a ridiculously even fight, Kevin. The Hellbat drops from the TheStC were really cool, but overall, now we're at 7 to 7 tanks, 7 to 5 Hellbats, 6 Vikings, but 2 Thor.
Well, the only reason that Ryung was able to take that engagement but still didn't have a massive advantage coming out of it was because of that Hellbat drop. It actually ended up killing quite a few workers, despite the fact that the missile turrets were in pretty good position, admittedly.
All right, well, Ryung is sieged now here by TheStC's tanks. Got a very nice leapfrog line going on. It looks like Ryung is going to come forward with this. The tanks of the TheStC will siege back up, but there are Hellbats with this composition now.
That's right, and there's a really nice spread on these tanks so that Ryung can't just concentrate his efforts in one place and just wipe them all out. So they're able to get quite a few shots as time goes along. Ryung took a calculated risk there to try and break out of that and do some good damage, and I don't think that was enough.
Yeah, but he broke the siege, you know, and he had the Hellbats. That was the problem. Where were the TheStC's Hellbats? They were behind the tanks. By the time he got to the front, Ryung had already pulled back, and now the siege is broken. The planetary is safe.
All right, so this is a pretty familiar position to be in Mech versus Mech, and that's what I was talking about before. The barracks is being rebuilt right now for Ryung just due to the fact that he needs to put up more factories now, pretty much in a hurry.
Yeah. Looks like we've got more Hellbat drops from the TheStC. He does still maintain air superiority. Ryung has made no effort to contest that at all. No Vikings made.
Yes, but he does have Thor, so he's trying to mitigate the amount of effectiveness that those actually have. Now, Thor's kill Vikings incredibly slowly. Yeah, they have splash damage. Yeah, they have infinite range, it seems like, when they're going into anti-air mode. Come on, you got to admit, it kind of seems like that sometimes. But, oh, this is a pretty good Hellbat drop, though, coming right back from Ryung. He's going to kill quite a few workers here. So he's pretty much giving that up and just saying, I want as powerful a ground army as is humanly possible.
Well, we've got some Vikings here for the STC. He's getting, kind of just camping over the tanks belonging to Ryung. Looks like the Hellbats were cleaned up in the top right-hand corner. And both of our guys are just so even right now.
Ooh, really nice drop, though, from the STC.
Yeah.
He trades out 2 Hellbats for two tanks, and that's a trade he'll make pretty much any day. Of course, these tanks are going to unsiege, and that's going to force a lift back from the STC, who can't quite kill that tank, and a good little win there for Ryung.
The entire time, these tanks are firing away on this planetary. Ryung begins to repair it with 1 SCV. Pretty sure that's not enough. All right, there we go. He will opt to commit to saving it now, but yeah, the SCC, once again, Kevin, he has the positional advantage on Ryung.
And that's kind of what he does. That's what he's known for, is having awesome, immaculate positioning. And he has those Vikings in a great spot, because right now the only recourse for Ryung is to be able to get directly on top of those siege tanks with a few Hellbats. But those Vikings are completely zoning out any medevacs that would fly overhead.
All right, well, at this point, Ryung needs a Hellbat drop on top of those tanks. That's the way he's going to battle back into this. Instead, it's the STC with a Hellbat drop on top of the SCVs. We'll kill them all off, and the planetary is gone.
Yeah, Planetary Fortress down. That's pretty significant at this stage. Admittedly, Ryung was doing some pretty good damage back at STC's third as well, but STC now takes a big advantage.
Oh,
3 bases to 4. Looks like it's going to become 5 here in just a bit. That's not a great place to be.
Now, the STC has a fantastic economy, and this is going to prompt Ryung to run forwards, but does he have a good enough position here as the Hellbats are battling against each other? The Hellbats belonging to the SCC all do collapse, but no. Ryung will be forced back. Beautiful target fire from the STC.
Did you see that momentary indecision, though, from Ryung? He was like, I'm going to run forward. I can get on top of these. Even if there's only 1 or 2 Hellbats, I know I can take out a couple of tanks. So he ducked forward, and he's like, no. Oh, yeah, I want to. No, I don't. And he took 2 extra rounds of shots from the STC's tanks, and that actually lost him, I'd say, an additional 4 or 5 Hellbats.
Yeah, a lot of losses there. And the STC overall, look at his bank right now, Kevin. 200 supply, essentially. 2,000, 1,500. Ryung, on the other hand, is starving for resources and has very little functioning in terms of economy.
All right, well, Ryung is going to have to win a massive engagement and kill a base, basically, is what it amounts to. And right now, he's not really in a position to do that. He's kind of stretched all across the map. We saw 2 Thors up at the top left-hand corner away from the main force, and those are going to be invaluable in this upcoming engagement. So not only is Ryung down by about 30 supply, he's playing voluntarily down an additional about 18 supply because of those units in the top left-hand corner.
STC, man, is just a positional god. Right now, he's dropping up into the third base of Ryung. Ryung's going to have to respond to this, and this means that a portion of his units are going to fall back. Will they take siege tank fire from the low ground? They are.
Yeah, and to be totally honest, though, he really has to watch out for those siege tanks there. He did a really nice job of trapping all those units into a little corner and minimizing the amount of fire he's going to take. Again, a little bit of a control mistake as he tried to decide how he was going to get directly on top of those siege tanks, but he just couldn't do it.
Looks like a couple of Hellbats are saying, no, Ryung, you cannot mine from this base. And that's going to force Ryung to send some Hellbats of his own up towards the north. Maybe we'll see a tank or 2 head up there instead. Either way, continuing pressure, and it looks like Hellbat will take out the turret.
All right, so Ryung now pushing forward and trying to break out of this contain. He's done a fairly effective job of doing that. He's not very well fortified over at his third, but he's got enough units that it prevents the STC from kind of just charging in. Oh, and it looks like he's actually going to engage right now, though. He smartly, he's not just going to charge in. He drops a Thor directly on top, and that sinks. That actually soaks up 1,000,000 shots from the siege tanks and allows him to start slowly pushing forward against this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the STC has a fantastic advantage at this point, thanks to exactly what you were talking about, Kevin. And well, he's going to come down Ryung with a bunch of tanks and actually managed to thwart that off for the moment. But he wanted to be pushing up the top. We saw those forces actually moving out. And instead of it being a bunch of tanks and Hellbats, it's, well, 2 Hellbats. Just 2.
I am going to say one thing, though. I don't feel that the STC has stretched this lead as much as he could have.
Yeah.
He's given back over air control now, as more Vikings are going to go down. He's continuing to take damage from Hellbat drops, and Ryung's done a nice job of continuing to make this a competitive game. It's certainly not in his favor. STC is miles ahead, but Ryung is making it competitive.
Yeah, well, we were talking about this towards the beginning of the game. This is not the type of game where you can siege up and suddenly your opponent is contained. So although the TVT had the advantage, he couldn't really say, like, because I have the advantage, Ryung, you cannot do anything.
Right.
There's a lot of attack paths on Neoplanet S. And so Ryung, since he's contained here on the bottom, has just swung up towards the top.
And now TheStC gets himself in a position where he's directly firing on his opponent's attack, and at the same, or his mineral line, and at the same time coming into the fourth and doing yet more damage there. And of course, that's an orbital command, not a planetary fortress, so it's going to be much more difficult for Ryung to try and engage that.
Yeah, Ryung is going to have to lift this command center, and that's such important mining for him. He needs these resources in order to be able to combat against the endless waves of units from the TVT.
Jeez, things are looking pretty dire right now. I mean, this is Mech, so you can't just walk up and kill your opponent in 10 minutes into the game or anything like that. But this is just kind of a slow death for Ryung right now, and he's just being starved and squeezed out of this game. TVT has been doing that pretty well, even if, like I said before, I don't think he's as far ahead as he could be.
Oh, this is a little bit... the TVT taking a lot of damage right now. Not so sure about this, Kevin. He's going to get the Hellbat drop now on the tanks, but he did take a lot of damage before he was able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Again, just wasn't exacting every advantage that he possibly could there. But the end result, of course, is that he has a massive position. He's way ahead of his opponent. He's crushing the third base right now. And I think, unfortunately, Ryung is going to have to tap out, and we may be going to a game number 3. Yeah,
he has cracked the third and is now at double the supply of Ryung. And Ryung is just not mining, Kevin. He's bringing in 100 minerals a minute. The TVT, 1,500.
TVT is looking much better now than he did against Huck. Earlier on, I thought he was a little bit sloppy. I thought that he was being outmatched by the other opponents that were in this group. But right now, he's shown through this game specifically that he has what it takes to really compete here, and he's going to put himself just one game away from Premier. We could have a scenario where Ryung, the guy who used to be known as the TVT God, the guy who took third place in Season 1, may not make it back to Premier.
Yeah, what I can tell you already, game goes to TVT. GG. I don't think